Hey guys, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity. I'm here with special guests from ArmCare.com. We got Dr. Ryan Croton and Jordan Osagara.
Close enough. I've been called worse.
Say it.
Osagara.
Osagara. Said it wrong last time too. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to talk about obviously throwing velocity. We'll talk about arm health, arm strength. We're also going to take a bunch of questions and we'll just leave it open to whatever happens. But right now, what are you doing over there, Dr. Ryan?
So, you know, one of the questions I keep getting, and I'm very active on LinkedIn, I like to educate a lot, I like questions coming in, is can you throw hard without injury? Okay, because if you're living under a rock, you're probably not seeing all the articles that are coming around, you know, regarding Shohei Ohtani's injury, and also, you know, the epidemic of Tommy John surgery that's going on in the league, and it just keeps getting worse. My short answer to it is yes, you can throw hard, you can throw at high velocity and be healthy. The importance of it is being able to use the ArmCare device, and essentially what this is it's indicating to you where you have changes in throwing arm range of motion, okay, and also strength. So if you think of your arm like a catapult, okay, we know we're testing actively how far back can the arm go, okay, on a given day. You're going to be able to look at, you know, how are they loading the catapult? Has that changed, okay? And then you're looking in the opposite direction. How much internal rotation does the athlete have in their shoulder, which is really important for full range and shoulder mobility. But then you're also looking, it's kind of tough with Big Jimmy here, but you're also looking at shoulder flexion. You know, how does the arm raise up? And when we see changes even on that small scale of range of motion, it's going to affect arm position. Okay, now couple this change in the catapult length, where you put it, you know, whether the arm now doesn't have the same mobility, so it's not laying back as much, or you're not raising your arm as much because you could have restrictions. There's also this other element of weakness. This dynamometer, it's a force testing unit, is where you measure strength as well. It's the only device in application where you're looking at range of motion and strength in the same sensor for a specific baseball app. But you want to understand what is the strength that the athlete's applying when pressing down. So we lie down, we press and get internal rotation strength. That's the strength that we need to accelerate the arm forward. But that strength is also necessary in decelerating the arm going backward. Okay, that's important too. And then we're also looking at, if we flip this around, we're looking at pushing upwards, okay, for external rotation, which is very, very important for the whole sequence. And then we also are looking with an outstretched arm, being able to raise, what's our strength, it's called scaption, do we have around the arm, and then we do a 3-finger pinch grip, okay? It's a very comprehensive look at shoulder strength, okay? And I'm gonna start there, and also grip strength, because if we have any issues in position, or we have any issues in strength, it's going to change where our arm is going to be positioned during the turn, okay? During the turn, when you get yourself, you know, getting close to cocking back your arm, you know, as far as possible, if I have any changes where I am here now, it's going to affect how much arm leg I have, okay? It's going to also, if I have some kind of obstruction or I'm not, you know, I'm not strong enough, you know, some athletes also have a flat or hooked acromion, which is this flat part here. I'm not going to be able to load my arm in the same position or elevate it. So what's going to happen is that this athlete, let's just say we were once here and now we're creeping down maybe 5 or 6 degrees, that trunk is going to tilt to be able to create the same arm position. So if my arm's dropping, I'm going to tilt. Now, a lot of the cases, I work for a lot of injured major league pitchers, and I have some college guys, and a lot of the times their altered position in their trunk relates to a lot of injuries they're seeing at the inner elbow. Now let me get to the inner elbow. Okay, in terms of the anatomy, you got this bump on the inside, that's a medial epicondyle. You got your ligament, this is my finger, okay, this is the Tommy John ligament, or the ulnar collateral ligament, and this is the one that snaps and has to get repaired. Now, if I have my arm fully extended, okay, the bones lock it. You can't get much play with my arm going back. When I go to full flexion, okay, the same thing, the bones lock the elbow. All right, now the problem is in between this range is where we throw, and that means the forearm can lay down and open up and put tension on the ligament. Okay, so this is really important because I was talking to you about this catapult that could be changing angles and directions. Now, if I have more layback, okay, maybe I have increased range and I'm very strong in the back of me and not in the front, I'm going to be bringing this catapult back fast, and I'm going to be pulling it back further, and then all of a sudden we got this ligament that's got to handle stress, okay, unless our forearm muscles are strong. And the one that we test is called the flexor digitorum superficialis. Huge name, okay, but this muscle goes right over the ligament. Now, if that muscle weakens, think about it. Here's like the bridge, but you need the concrete and everything around it. You need the strength to fortify it, which comes from the muscles. If the muscles that help me keep this ligament together are weakened, then we got a lot of stretching on the ligament, and then over time, you know, it can create damage. It can cause forearm flexor strains, and then we create damage. So, you know, when we talk about throwing at high velocity, it's all about testing, checking all the imbalances. Now, all the compensations that I'm saying that happens, and most times these compensations are happening more from upper arm, upper extremity fatigue than it's happening from the lower body, okay? Because athletes are able to load and they're highly conditioned down here. This takes a huge amount of effort. When you throw, you might not believe how much force goes through the arm, but it's tremendous. In this position here, you're throwing over 90 miles an hour, it's like having a 73-pound dumbbell in your hand, okay, that's really causing the turning force to open the elbow. And just so that you know, if you took your arm out and you wanted to know what this feels like to open your elbow, anytime that I move my thumb away from me, okay, that's a valgus applied torque. I'm really trying to open the inner elbow by sending my thumb back, okay? Especially pitchers that have a really strong supinated grip, okay, where my thumb's down, it can open up the elbow, right? And then if I go the other way, I bring my pinky in, that's called a varus torque. The varus torque shuts the elbow together. It doesn't put a lot of stretch, okay, on the ligament. Those muscles are what try to close it, okay, and tighten things up. Now, I got imbalances, we got problems, because that elbow, as I mentioned, is the hinge. So when we talk about shoulder imbalances, this is something we need to know. Let's just say most major leaguers, and I see this because when I check them for injuries for the elbow, I always say, okay, in my mind I'm thinking he's probably got a really big ratio, meaning he's really strong going back in his external rotator cuff. He's probably very weak in internal rotation. I also asked them to give me a copy of their ArmCare plan, and generally they don't have any internal rotation strength prescribed. That's a problem because the shoulder's got to work on both sides. So we got to make sure that we have this balance. And if you use the app and you test your strength, you're going to know this all the time. And we're at TopVelocity. They're elite coaches. This program, they're developing velocity with safe methods. There's not weighted ball or running guns. I'm not saying it's bad to do them. It's just got to be right for the right guy. But this allows you to have communication about your arm, and it really allows you to take responsibility for your career. So by knowing this, your programs can be adjusted. You can get recovery when you need it. You can be ahead of it. When I read an article that Shohei Ohtani was offered an MRI, he declined it. That's way late stage when you're being reactionary of saying, okay, what damage did he do, right? Let's get ahead of this in this industry and get guys throwing hard and throwing healthy by monitoring arm strength. And again, I told you a little bit about these compensations that create small changes in the delivery.
Yeah, I mean, on that too, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is a lot of guys get into this ritualized phase of development to where they go, well, day 1 is always this, day 2 is always that, day 3 is this, day 4, day 5, if you're in Pro Bowl, that's when you're starting, or day 6, then leading into day 7, they go, I can't adjust this no matter what. With our sensor, we're able to use something we call our post-exam, where we're actually seeing what muscles fatigued, how much strength did you lose. So now maybe day 1 you can actually do a little bit of throwing because you need to build a little more volume. Maybe day 1, if you're really fatigued, it needs to be adjusted. And we filmed a couple of videos on this on why it's so important not to just only track throw volume, pitch totals, different things like that. Is I had a 14-year-old freshman who, when I'm building them up, their third outing is a 20-pitch sim inning, rest, and then a 20-pitch sim inning. Their next week is the exact same thing. His first week, he lost 7% strength in a post-exam. So that means his day 1 through 4 is going to look the exact same. His next week, on the same exact loading, he lost 27% strength. So life happens. Is it bad sleep? Maybe it was taking tests, whatever it may be. It's important to be able to adjust that next day 1 through 4 because if we're staying in that, perhaps Otani, we're talking about him, if he's staying on that same routine, that same, we'll just call it a ritual, and there's other days where he's fatigued, other days where he's fresh, all of a sudden you're training on a weakened muscle base, and then you're throwing on a weakened muscle base, which is going to put that ligament
And that
with
brings
more
in a
issues.
good question here. Francisco's asking, as far as the shoulder or the elbow, is it weakness or is it the ability to handle the stress? So for example, like maybe the next week he threw at a higher intensity. So the volume was more fatiguing because the muscle contractions were much higher. Can you explain like how
Can I answer that real quick?
You go ahead. You go
Okay.
ahead.
So tell me if you've seen something different with your group, or even if you've seen different with your guys who are using the ArmCare stuff. But my stronger arms, regardless of velocity, are less fatigable. And when I say stronger arms, we
And
have
is that
our
fatigue? Well, but can we look at fatigue in two things? Is that fatigued in high intensities or in average intensities over long periods of time? So
I've noticed it on both.
Acute and long
Acute,
term.
yeah.
Right.
So when I'll
Yep.
look at it is, I had one athlete. We were in the postseason this year, and he really strong arm, and he had to have a strong arm because the summer prior he was playing travel ball, and don't even get me started on a whole lot of that stuff. But he was playing travel ball. He wasn't recovering. He ended up having to go get an MRI. Thank God nothing had happened, but we now had to start building this kid up. Once he came back to me, we were able to get a really high volume of strength underneath him from ArmScore, SVR, so relative and absolute strength. So with that, what I saw was before, as we started building that strength in, we started building up that aspect of it. Early in the season, he was seeing a little bit more strength loss regardless of pitch totals. Once we built that volume up in the postseason, like I was mentioning, he threw the max of 110 pitches. And I had a coach tell me, man, that's a lot to push that guy late in the year. I go, well, I did a post exam. He lost 3% strength. I actually did that kid harm by having a pitch cap on that guy. He's undertraining that arm in terms of volume. So, yeah, I've been able to see that. My better, stronger arms generally fatigue less regardless of that point in the season.
And real quick, you got to tie this into, was that day where he lost all that strength on the same workload, mechanicals, because that's where I really believe. I look at that one study that found that pitchers that were landing it with a more closed hip position, their valgus stress was almost double on the elbow. So say that day that kid's not separating well, is that now the stress, the load is so much higher? So it's like, how do we address mechanical? Is it a fact? Do you believe?
Do you
that
want to touch on that,
mechanics
Ryan, with
are
the
causing
biomechanics
more
aspect?
valgus
Well,
stress?
well, see, the thing is, as I mentioned, I always start with the arm. And most people in the industry, they're looking from the ground up. They're looking at all sorts of joint mobility, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's all sorts of elements. But I look at the arm because when you have arm fatigue, okay, you're going to have compensation. I don't necessarily look at mechanics as good or bad, especially if an athlete's performing really well and are pain-free. I try not to fortune tell, and what keeps me kind of in the loop is looking at changes in 3D biomechanics, so the change, and also looking at changes in strength. But strength is always, for me, it matters most. The heuristic I use is that stronger people are harder to kill. You think of superheroes, it's tough to kill those guys. You want to have the same thing with your arm. A lot of what happens, and when people look at this, and this is not the right mentality for testing your arm strength and range of motion. It's not a limiter. You're not doing this to take away, okay? The whole element is to develop capacity. When you are developing high amounts of arm strength, I have one athlete started at 57, which is an arm score. That means all the muscle testing, he only had 57% of his big body, and now he's at 140. He can develop more work, okay? He can take on more work. The throwing volumes can go up. And I got a few athletes like that. You want to use this device, fix any imbalances, correct deficits, understand your fatigue, so that you can handle more. We created pitch counts, 100 pitch limit. It was done way back with the Orioles. I asked Tom House, how did this come about? And it was just basically a mathematical equation that 15 pitches per inning is roughly where a major league pitcher should be. But we got 3 different bodies here. You have a different body, and we're assigning the same workload to everybody similarly, right? You might have an injury history. I got one guy who's a reliever. I got a couple relievers that have come back from injury. And we say to test every 72 hours. I'm telling them to test every 48 because they could go back to back and have that conversation. Some of them go 2 innings. They have a conversation. Now they go 1 inning. They preserve their arm health. You have to be dynamic, meaning that you can make adjustments to your training and limit the amount of compensation. So when Brent, his original question was, when guys land and their pelvis is more closed, okay? So let's just say here I start at 90, okay, if you can see me, and then as I'm rotating, let's just say I get to 55 degrees if this is the 0 facing home plate, that might not be enough where they want to get to like 30 degrees opening. A lot of what can happen there is there's been a change in the arm position. Maybe the athlete's trying to lay back some more. They need extra time, okay? This is called horizontal abduction. They're really trying to load their arm back, okay? And they're creating more leg, and so that pelvis isn't getting around. There's all sorts of different elements, but I always say if you start with the arm, that's the biggest bang for your buck, and you want to be able to save those arms because guys aren't, they're not exactly going on the injured list because they lack hip internal rotation. What's happening is that the muscles are getting overwhelmed. They're not able to handle the stress. It's potentially happening from some kind of kinetic chain element or the linked system of segments, but we gotta be good here. And people are walking around everywhere not knowing where their arm strength is at or their range of motion actively.
To go a little more in depth on that question too, is I think yes, it could be from some type of biomechanical compensation that causes a higher strength loss, because on that day he actually had recovered. He was 5 pounds up based on his last fresh exam. It was a recovered arm. But with that, when you start pitching in the season, you're going around, unless you're playing on a league that only uses nice, turf mounds, different things like that, you might be pitching in a hole or landing in a hole, and now you have to adjust, and you've created your own compensation without even realizing it. So that's where, for me, strength has to be that foundation of being able to bulletproof yourself. Stronger guys are harder to kill. If you don't have that strength, and even if it's a really mechanically sound individual, they get in there, and all of a sudden the guy before them has that weird hole, and where they're normally used to striding slightly closed, now all of a sudden they're having to stride slightly open, you've now thrown off the sequence. You're going to cause that arm to fly. You're going to cause a whole bunch of issues, and if you're not strong enough to handle that, number one, you're going to fatigue quicker, and if you fatigue, 36 times higher likelihood, something like that. So that's where it's like blending the skill and the training with the strength to make sure you have a well-rounded athlete. I don't know if that made sense.
I want to add something on this too, because I've been dealing with a lot of injured players, but I got some healthy ones too. One of the things I want to stress to the people who are watching this right now is that you also need to evaluate your warm-up. And when Jordan, we've been talking about the post-exam, we're looking at the change from your baseline strength when you're recovered and after throwing. We're testing this to understand a true determination of how fatigable the arm is. What I do with a lot of my athletes early on, especially when they're, throughout the rehabilitation stage, we don't pick up a baseball, okay, for to begin their throwing program. We do it in stages. We want to look at all the specific activation of the muscles. We want to look at the throwing specific warm-ups, whether you're using PlyoCare balls or other implements. And we're doing post-testing on those so that we can understand if your warm-up process, okay, going into games or even into your toss, and then you stage it after your long toss, you stage it after your bullpen. If your arm, okay, at certain stages is not getting stronger after your warm-up and you're going into games weaker, intuitively, we got to think about this, guys. This is happening everywhere. This is another reason why I can't bag on velocity. I think it's critical for high performance in baseball in this day and age. What's happening is we're not being scientific enough about our warm-up strategies in the effect of athletes may be doing too much or too little to get activated, and they're going into games lacking strength. So you think about it, I'm going to throw at 100% effort, but yet my arm is showing me that I'm at 95% of my maximum strength capacity. It shouldn't be rocket science to know the warm-up process sucks. Like, there's just no other way to communicate that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the perfection or the savior of the ArmCare device, is that you're gauging the durability or the health of the arm, because that's what's taking the blunt force trauma, right? It's like the tires of the car. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's where you want to assess, because if something's gone wrong, the arm is dealing with the problem. So if we can see there's a drop in strength, and then we know, wow, there's something must be going on. But I want people to think more than just the arm at that point. We need the arm to assess the problem. Mm-hmm. Then we need to go searching all through everything, through the programming, through the body, through everything to see where's the problems coming from, and it's probably not just one thing.
No,
Give you a quick example.
Yeah, go
we
ahead.
actually used this during our time in Pro Ball, where we had an athlete who had dropped a ton on his arm strength. I'm not going to use his name.
Yeah, no names.
So I went back in. I had that trainer. It was in our AA affiliate. He reached out and said, he's dropped on his arm strength. What's going on here? So I said, let me look at something here. So I went back, looked at his delivery. Next thing you know, his stride had shortened. And he used to be a guy who was able to lock that knee out at release, and all of a sudden he starts sinking into it. Said, test his legs out. He'd strained a left hamstring, doing I forget what it was. So that was able to, it wasn't actually a shoulder issue. But the shoulder issue triggered us to look
But
into
the
this,
shoulder,
and we found
the
it.
shoulder also told you something was
told us,
going
yeah.
on because it was
Exactly.
taking
It is
more
the
forward.
window into the soul of a baseball player. I mean,
Yeah.
even so, I remember when we started with the Angels, we did hand grip dynamometry testing, and I thought that was the right way to go. Bent elbow, seated, knock out the legs, okay. And what we did is we elevated it, okay, because there's a lot of research to show that the shoulder is also involved in this particular type of testing, and it also shuts down the pecs in being able to identify where there's a change in strength. Now, one of the things that we saw there, and that was a full hand grip, and it had kind of like, you do the day before was pretty high strength, and we did post pitching, it would go down, and then we would go on the bullpen day, and it looked like a check mark, okay, or like a Nike swoosh, all right? Now, when you look at the pinch grip, and research is coming out like that, it doesn't respond the same. Some athletes looking regionally, they actually get stronger, okay, and others get weaker after throwing bouts. That what we noticed looking in this window into the sole of the arm is that when we did the hand grip strength, and it's the same theory when we do our pinch grip, like holding it like a baseball and testing our strength there, is that we were able to identify some athletes that were pre-TOS. And if you know what TOS is, that's thoracic outlet syndrome, okay? Thoracic outlet syndrome just means there's a blood supply that's just not getting to the arm, it's being pinched. When you're in this position, okay, the gravity alone is reducing blood flow to the muscles, okay? So looking at trends of changes in this particular position can also alert you before the athlete's getting tingling in their fingers and those kinds of things, that something is not right. Something needs to be mobilized. They might have too much play, like some athletes that have very lax shoulder joints, the head of the humerus can actually pinch off some of the blood supply in deep external rotation, horizontal abduction, some of the arteries.
You can have some cervical issues too from all the deceleration forces,
For sure.
shifting the ribs around, causing pinching.
For sure, but the thing is that this is a portable smoke screen. You got to figure out, is there a fire?
Smoke
Right?
detector.
Smoke detector. We got to find the smoke detector, and then we got to say, all right, when we see this, what could be the potential mechanisms?
No, you're right. That's brilliant. That's the assessment that's identified. It's the alert, like you said.
Yeah.
Now, where's the problem coming from? But it's more than just blood loss. It's when it pinches the nerve. Now the nerve can't fully activate the flexor mass.
Exactly.
So now you might be strong, but your muscle activation has been limited, is shut down.
Well, you're saying it perfectly, because I know we talk about strength, and the message I constantly state, and you do too, is strength matters most. I mean, I started out as a strength coach, got a pitching genius that's saying it now, and then you got a guy, Brent's like a hybridized everything, that he's always believed in that, for the athletes, very holistic programming. But you have to identify these things. You do. You have to understand the fatigue properties. That's another big concern.
Because you can't just go off feel. I think
Yes.
the point you got to talk about is we can't just go off feel. Feel is too much.
We can't.
Real
If the
quick on that.
technology's there, why do we
And
guess at it?
Right,
Anybody
exactly.
who's ever pitched, and it tells you I played on some bad teams when I was in the starting rotation. First off, so if anybody who's been on starting rotation in Pro Bowl, when you're on that 5-day, and you get to that day 3, you go, okay, this is your bullpen day, and it's like rain or shine. It doesn't matter what it is. You feel like you've been hit by a truck. You're like, I got to get to my 25 pitches, and you're just not getting in these good quality reps. So what you're able to do now is test that out, and if you're not strong enough, or in your fatigue, number one, you're not going to be able to train. There's no muscle memory. It's your nervous system at the end of the day. So if your nervous system's already fatigued, you're not going to get good reps. If you're not going to get good reps, you're going to train a bad habit. So if you really want to train a bad habit on your biggest volume day, go for it and see how that works.
Right.
But if you're fatigued, now all of a sudden, instead of that 25 pitch pen, let's shorten it up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or maybe if your strength is good, maybe that's the day you work on that slider to the glove side. You get a few extra reps there. Or if you're doing some med ball work, that's the day you want to get your extra med ball work in. But understand that strength is the foundation of building skill.
Mm-hmm.
There's some cool studies out in Japan talking about the lumbopelvic control and the strength through that whole, whatever you call that there. You guys are strength guys. Pelvic girdle. That sounds right. We're going to go with that.
Complex.
Yeah.
Complex. There we
Yeah.
go. But they're saying the guys that were better on strength there pitched better. You know, so there was some really cool stuff coming out on that, and that's where strength is the foundation for building out your daily practice plans.
Yeah, and if you go off a feel, your feel could be very wrong. I don't know how many times a dad tells me my son's really strong. It's crazy that he'll say that knowing that he's about to walk into a full assessment. So he's already telling me. So I'm assuming this dad must assess the same way we do because he wants us to know he's strong, and then he comes in and he
He's not there.
underperforms, and you're like, where did that conception that the father had that he was strong, where does that come from? Just like it's your feel, because I think you can't trust your feel.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing I want to talk about is because you have to have good data. You have to do things that you're taking as a standard, okay? And that's, we have pretty explicit ways of how you're going to be doing the testing so that it's similar, okay? But like imagine, the old way would say, imagine I had this dynamometer, this force testing unit in my hand, okay? And one of the methods of testing used to be a brake test. It was very common, it probably still is in professional sports and college, is where I'm holding the device and I'm pushing on the athlete's arm and I'm trying to brake them. They're holding it, and then as soon as they lose position, I get a reading. Now you got to think of how inconsistent that is, because if I'm doing it, and no offense to Jordan, but he might not be as strong in the upper body as me, and he's doing the testing, right?
I don't think it's a mind.
And the same athlete, we're going to get different numbers. Now, the other thing too in pro ball, and that's the lens I have, is that you're sharing players basically. They're going, you want your players to progress through levels. So your clinical staff is going to have sometimes different techniques. Okay, so that might not even be standardized, but they have different strength levels that will create inconsistency. You need consistent measures for you to actually execute change. Now, one of the things I want to say that you guys might think like that's crazy is that on the days that athletes get on the mound, okay, whether it's a game or it's a bullpen, and we're talking about this in our courses, is mega dosing them. Okay, so that means after they throw, you're going to have some pretty heavy training days. Okay, now the dynamometer alters it. If you have fatigue, right? If you have poor recovery, if you have both, it's changing the intensity in the app, and it's going to be changing the volume. But when you mega dose these things, now you're playing on improving recovery, okay? There's been science, and Brent reads a ton of it, that has shown that, let's take a starting pitcher, the day after they throw, their nervous systems are still altered. And we talked about, the nervous system. We talked about neurological control of muscles. Their autonomic nervous system, okay, the fight and flight, is out of whack, and they're identifying that with a change in heart rate variability. It's actually gone down. You want a variable heart rate that's telling you you have more parasympathetic control. Now, here's the issue. In traditional training, athletes are going from they throw a ton on the starting, they don't do anything after the games, and guess what? The next day, they effing kill themselves. They're squatting heavy, they're doing heavy ArmCare, and now they're in a non-recovered state already to begin with, right? This should be the recovery focus. Now, the bullpen, Jordan mentioned the bullpen organization. What day does it go on? A lot of teams, okay, and coaches, they put the bullpen on day 2. So you pitch, you then crush your body the next day, and then the next day after is your most intense training day of the cycle, of the week, right? So you gotta think about how you're using this data to make better decisions in stimulating the athlete's muscles and nervous system and recovering them so that they can sustain performance, and identifying is your warm-up routine. And if you're doing a warm-up routine that everybody is doing the same thing and there's no individuality, there could be a problem there. But you got to individualize it for the individual, because if I'm using, let's just say it's plyo balls, and I have a 1-pound ball, I might be more fatigued in my internal rotator cuff than someone else, okay? Or I might not
and then
lay
here's
back
the scary thing too, is if you are fatigued, and then you're taking that plyo ball and you're creating now an artificial external rotation with him pulling it further back,
Yeah.
and that muscle's not ready, now you've increased your risk of injury on that day.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
there's a lot of problems that can happen there
Yeah.
if you're not monitoring that strength.
But I mean, I think the lesson is use quantified, use data to measure the state of where you are, and base your training and your customization off of that. No, don't go off of, try to avoid going off of just how you're feeling. Also, use it just to see in your own programming, like you're saying, how is my programming working? As that is the assessment tool. I do this in my programming to get this result. Well, assessed, is it actually giving you that result? Are you actually recovered coming into your next start?
Yep.
Are you actually, these things you're doing in between, are they actually supporting recovery? Or are they negatively affecting recovery?
To give a real world
go ahead.
story,
Yep.
not going on feel. And like Ryan said, the system's not designed to reduce and take throws away. It's designed to let you throw more. So I had a player, he'd been in the big leagues with a couple organizations, but he was not on the 40-man with this current organization. And their rule was you had to throw back-to-back in AAA to go to the big leagues. Just their rule as a bullpen arm. He had done it 50 to 100 times. Obviously, it's not new for him. So he throws, we'll say it was on a Friday, I forget what it was, but he goes 1 1/3, roughly 27, 29 pitches, something like that. He calls me and says, hey, they want to know if I'm active, and I feel like I've been hit by a car. I go, well, go get a strength test in, because based on your org's rules, I can think of about 700,000 reasons to pitch tonight.
Yeah, right.
I can think of a lot of reasons. So he goes through, gets himself warmed up, does a strength test. He goes, I'm actually up 3 pounds. Why do I feel so bad? Because feel's not real.
Yeah.
So, yeah, get a little more activation in, get the Crispies out, and then go to post. 3 days later, he's pitching, I won't say where, but he's in the National League pitching and making a whole bunch of money. So
Yeah.
that little tiny thing right there of him going, oh, yeah, sometimes you got to go to work with a headache. It just is what it is. Your strength is fine. You're going to be good to go.
Yep. And we have, the one thing I really like is that we developed a course called the Certified Pitching Biomechanist course. And people, we talk mechanics a lot in the world of baseball, but we haven't really combined the strength element. We create something called a strength and coordination tree. And, this is why you have to look at arm strength and understand how an athlete throws. I'm just going to give you a case in point. When it comes to like some Tommy John athletes, so some athletes are taught when they bring the ball out of the glove is to get the ball to the ear, okay? Is to actually drive the hand into the ear. So I have a lot of athletes. The first thing I do when I get them, I say, give me an inventory of your biomechanical changes. Then I identify where they're at. I look at their video and I look at some of their 3D data to figure out what do they need to do for strength, okay? What causes injury potentially? Okay, so their arm path was ball to ear, and sometimes these are really hard to break, okay? This is a motor preference. This is an athlete that wants to get closer to their center of mass opposed to one that likes to be away. But what happens is when the athlete goes into layback, okay, so you can't see this easily, but when the athlete goes into layback, they can't lay back with the bicep contracted. You won't be able to lay back. It's basically creating too much stabilization in the shoulder. So as they're laying back, the arm is flying out. Okay, and then they throw. And we've done some research with ASMI. I've been involved with them. They've been awesome to look at biomechanical efficiency. This is in the course. This is miles per hour per unit of relative torque on the elbow. Efficiency is you can throw harder with less loading. And one of the things we found just simply here is that if you're flexing and you're way inside 90, okay, you are going to, you're going to drive. You got to know, hey, if my guy does this and he is performing, okay, and he's got no pain, and I know when I'm looking at the biomechanical graphs, when he gets to external rotation, okay, his elbow's here. It's not inside 90 or around 90. His elbow's extended. We know that we're putting a lot more stretch on this ulnar collateral ligament, okay, that's here, and we need to know if we got a change in that pinch grip strength, we got trouble. So now you understand, how can I manage this particular athlete performing well, no pain? How can I train them so that we can sustain the velocity and the performance and also keep them healthy, and allows the athlete to communicate, okay? So this is kind of how you feed it all together as your smoke signal, but then understanding how is the coordination of the athlete, how does my strength change, how's it going to impact them just based on how they throw, okay? We have to know those things.
Yeah, and that's when you got to go all the way down the chain in my book, you know. You want to do Q&A? We got
Sure, are there
some?
questions?
Yeah, we got Francisco asked another one. Francisco said, I'm a user of ArmCare. My score is 102, 215 pounds in total strength. And when I feel most fatigued, I check the videos. I'm not using properly my hips and legs. Then he says, does arm strength equal more to velocity or health?
Is he doing a post-exam? So that's a big thing, is that when you're seeing these biomechanical changes, you have to also evaluate, did it come with a strength loss, right? So, you know, when the strength is optimized, he's got a pretty good number. That means he's over body weight strength, and these kids are, you know, 215 pounds. That's a big boy with a pretty strong arm.
Yeah, how old's Francisco? 26
Yeah,
or
that's a really strong arm for
me. The days that he's less efficient with his lower half relates to more fatigue.
And and that can happen. Or, you know, if we're looking at fatigue of the arm, it can also influence the lower half that we got to be able to look after. You know, my research was in compensations in the pitching delivery, and if you are, you know, if you're really starting to lose strength in your upper extremity, you know, you're going to modify your ground reaction force, right? You will.
And
you might have to
don't
create.
modify it for
Well,
the better.
it's the
Yeah,
chicken
you-
or
you
egg.
might have-
Did you find it is the strength goes down and then your stride length drops, or your stride length drops and then your strength
See,
goes down?
okay, so that interaction is interesting. It needs to be researched more.
Yeah.
Where I looked at this is that there's a few things. Shortening a stride is better for managing internal physiology. When you're tired, you know, regionally, you got more blood flow that's going to your legs, right? Your arm doesn't get a ton of blood compared to your legs, right? And so when you're fatigued there and your heart rate, you want to drop all of those kind of biochemical consequences, you start to restrict your stride length. So shortening stride is good for internal physiology. However, now what happens when you stride short, okay, what do you have to do to get your arm in position? You don't have time.
Yeah, you have less time.
You got to build it up. And remember, we talked about that catapult, got to lay it back fast. This research that I've been able to do and blessed to do is it showed that there is a significant forearm strength change, okay? So, you know, all these compensations, the chicken or the egg, it's just important to know they may happen, okay? Things happen. You get in a fight with your girlfriend or your significant other and you can't sleep. You know, you skip breakfast, you know, you're dehydrated. All of these things can play into a compensation. The key is, can the arm handle these differences in variability? Because in my research, I manipulated their stride length and there was no change in velocity. I don't believe velocity is a very great predictor of fatigue because it's way late stage when you're losing 2 or 3 miles an hour. That's like way late. The fatigue happens when you're changing.
Because it has to do with how you're getting to your velocity.
Right.
Because if you change the way to that number, that's going to have the effect on the body.
Yep.
To piggyback on that too, is I remember seeing even when guys would reduce their stride length, obviously you're going to start releasing the ball a little further from home plate. Now you're giving that hitter more time to see the ball. He's got, even if it's very little time, to see, read, react, and foul it off. And all of a sudden you go from an average of 17 pitches to an inning, and all of a sudden you're now throwing 19 pitches per inning, and that accumulates over where, yeah, it may not have changed velocity, but you've increased your pitch count, you're going to be more fatigued. So looking at it from a competitive standpoint, and that's what I've seen is when guys, even though they're maintaining velocity, maintaining pitch shapes, but that stride shortens, generally their pitches per inning seem to go up off whatever their average is, and now we're accumulating more workload. That's not going to happen.
I also saw a study as players age, their velocity, they were able, their mechanics changed, but they were able to maintain their velocity through sequencing the kinetic chain a little bit better.
There are changes. Older players, it's been shown in research, actually have lower strides, right? And the thing is, we may lose extensibility. There's been lots of research to show that the peak age of baseball players is 29 years old, and they've matched it to elastic properties. Vertical jump power goes down in that group.
Right.
So, you know, I know we're talking about arm strength, but if this athlete, you know, simply did, you know, a broad jump, or they were looking to see, you know, I do single leg broad jumps, I want to see interlimb which ones may be, which limb may be suffering. Like,
Yeah, right.
your theory, which is great, it's heavy drive leg, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is too, the stride leg correlates more to velocity, but if you don't have the speed
Yeah.
going into that landing, or let's just say I stride short, this athlete might be striding short, he may have a very vertical shin. He might actually flex into the landing, but these are things that need to be checked as well. That
Well,
could be an
studies
issue.
show the drive leg will pump it into the proximal segments, the energy, and then the landing leg pumps it out to the distal segments. So the legs are just pumping energy in the system and helping pump it out of the system. So if the legs are changing, then that's affecting how energy is coming in and how energy is going out.
One of the things, like with this athlete, you talked about the pelvis, which is really interesting because I talked to Dr. Aguinaldo. He's at Point Loma. He's done a lot of work, and they've just partnered with the Padres. But a lot of his research is on the pelvis. The pelvis is like the funnel. It's the generator and the funnel.
I call it like the transmission.
Yeah. Because let's say I'm a righty, it's sending energy. It's transferring it to the block leg and also into the trunk. It's crazy because like he mathematically looked at the energy transfers and they were bidirectional. So, we have to ensure that pelvis is held in a good place. Now, one of the things that I look at, and I coach a lot with my athletes, and I don't want to lean on Jimmy, but I do a lot of internal rotation work, okay, in open chain. And the reason being is if the athlete can hold internal rotation, that means like if I'm going more heel, or if I'm a righty, my foot's more towards the shortstop, it's storing energy in the back hip.
Longer, yeah.
And then all of a sudden, here I am, I'm storing energy, I'm not releasing it, it's going to that hip, and now it's transferring bidirectionally, and it's just a little easier sequence. When it gets to the trunk, there's a lot more absorption of the arm because there's mismatch in the energy transfer. One's generating and then it's got to absorb because the arm's going back, trunk's starting to go forward, okay? Now, we have to look at all those things, but I'll just keep bringing it back. You got to look at the throwing arm and at least narrow it down and say, hey, like afterwards, am I losing strength? Is it more than 10%? It'd be amazing. I got some relievers, they get potentiated after games. They go in, and one got called up to the big leagues, which was amazing because his arm strength going into that day was like 5% higher. His arm score went up by 5, just psychologically, adrenaline. But after, his arm strength was over 100. Right. After being in a major league game. That's what we want to see. Right. That's that neurological efficiency that we gotta look for.
It says, the guy goes, I've got a question. What can I do? I have since I don't know, like 3 to 4 months problems with my inner elbow when I am pitching, and right now I can pitch at the moment, need some help to some care. So about, medial stress,
so
medial
right here.
injury.
So remember, the ligament is underneath the muscles, the flexor pronator mass that goes over top of it. We want to be very sure that we have not lost strength, okay? So that's the first thing I look at. I want to identify where's the strength. Most times that I see athletes that have been hurt, they're under 15% body weight. They're under our checkpoint, okay? And a good goal, anybody who throws over 100 or up to 100, anybody that's like upper 90s to 100, you want to really aim for 20% or more. Because this segment it's got to do a lot. It's impossible to throw the ball that hard with super low loads, like you're throwing in an 80s. Now we can all throw with different loading on the elbow, right? We all can. The question is, even guys that have lower loads, might be 2 or 3 newton meters lower than another guy, they get hurt, and it's because their guy wires, their strength that goes over top to protect the ligament is down. So you got to check that first. Now, if the forearm strength checks out, okay, where I look for first is nutritionally, okay? How are they recovering? And the other thing, so I always say, fatigue is the enemy. Strength matters most, but circulation is king. It's in our course. Circulation in our MLB habits and recovery course, circulation is king. So you have to identify in the program, what are they doing? What is the athlete doing to increase blood flow to the area of the arm, because it's got to heal. Now, you look at this ligament. This is in science, okay? Let's just say my fingernail side, that's the distal part of the ligament. Or sorry, that's the proximal side of the ligament, my fingernail. Now, on the other side of my elbow, okay, which is more towards my knuckle, that's the distal that's on this high moving speed part. Where my fingertip is, that gets a pretty good amount of blood for this ligament. Now, as I start moving towards my knuckle, okay, on the distal part of the ligament, there's not a lot of blood there. It's almost avascular, okay? Now, if I get an injury to this UCL, the proximal side sometimes really takes to conservative treatment and PRP injection. When I get to the distal side, it's avascular. Generally, you're going under the knife. So the key is, how can we get more circulation throughout the arm in our recovery process so that it nourishes the ligament but also the muscles around to regenerate? A lot of the elbow pain is happening, I believe, because the forearm may not be optimized in strength. And again, that could be other factors like circulation and the recovery methods used.
One thing I'd like to look biomechanically is it's reducing medial stress, is like putting this under load for less time, and obviously at a less peak force. So what I can do biomechanically to put this valgus position under load for a short amount of time is I can get to a pronated position faster. Like, well, ultimately first, giving the arm time to first get up and get into a position where it can go into layback and go into release. So if I get more hip to shoulder separation, meaning if I get, as my pelvis is opening, if I can keep my shoulder closed, now I give the arm time to get up and get into position before acceleration, because if it's all coming together, I have less time. So there's a chance my arm is going to be dragging and staying loaded in that medial position longer. So the more hip to shoulder separation gives me more time to get into position. And then I want to make sure once it gets into position, my trunk is already ready to funnel the energy. Like, I'm not in position and my arm's like, there's no energy. I need you to keep trying to add energy. So if once my arm gets up into position, my front leg is stable, my trunk is now ready to explode and go forward, therefore my arm's gonna wanna get pronated and start deceleration. But if I get to that position, I don't have any energy in my trunk, I have to use the arm to add that energy. So everything I can do biomechanically to take the time and the extra work when my arm is in that position, that's going to also reduce the stress.
This is a good point, because I'm going to, you know, I like that this viewpoint is good for our crew who are listening.
We broke him.
Oh, I hope he doesn't.
Keep talking, I'll try to fix him.
So, you know, in the arm and maximum layback, you need to have what I call co-contraction strength, and you know, it's been documented in evidence, but I call it econ training, where you know, the way you train has to be isometric, which is your co-contraction, meaning that there's no motion in the joint, okay? But it also has to have an eccentric component, which is the negatives, okay, to create strength and length. But when the arm is laid back like this, okay, there is an instant, and we talk about it in the Certified Pitching Biomechanist course, that the arm is in a co-contracted state in layback that's actually not moving as the athlete for a couple clicks in position. It's setting the catapult. You know, what happens is when we have imbalances, this starts moving in and out of plane. So you might have your isometric position with the elbow leaking forward, very pushy, okay? It puts a lot of stress on the elbow there, right? Now, again, you know, it's hard to get Jimmy back, and I don't want to mess him, but you might be getting into your layback position in a really horizontal abducted position. That means they're way behind the plane. I got a couple athletes that get into maximum external rotation over 20 degrees behind them. Okay, it's not even with the axis of the trunk. Okay, so we have to, you know, we have to understand, you know, these are positions that the athletes get into. We have to fortify it with strength. Okay, and if we are going to make a mechanical change, remember, we start with pain and poor performance. This young man is, you know, is obviously having pain. He's talking about it. The first thing, we fix strength and length. Are there any issues around here? Because I'm showing you the shoulder relationship to the elbow here, okay? So we got to fix those things first. Now, once those are optimized and the strength-velocity ratio is high, right, we start looking at what can we do positionally or in the delivery, okay, that allows this athlete to put his arm in the right position. And this is why I like, you know, watching your stuff, Brent, and TopVelocity. There's a lot of lower body context. That's the first place I go. I wouldn't, and Jordan and I have seen, touching the arm, doing changes with their arm path, trying to come out of different devices, or, you know, shortening it, or even, you know, changing a guy's lower half without, you know, working on the arm is a problem. So, you know, you have to first say, what's the simple fix that can get this maximal external rotation position where there's no more speed. At this position, the arm's at 0 velocity, okay? So, as I'm laying back the arm, as the arm lays back, it can lay back as fast as like 1,500 degrees per second. Some guys really have a fast layback, short arm, really fast layback, okay? But, then you have this high velocity, coming forward. Sometimes these guys come out there at like 7,000 degrees. We got to fix a lot around there to be in the right position when they're not at any speed. Once I get back here, right now I'm at 0 degrees per second. It's not moving. For a couple clicks, you got to look at what's the position of this elbow, okay, and arm in that position. And, you got to think about what do I need to do, if the strength is optimized and I got all those and he's still having pain, what do I need to do? And we have it in the course to better align this, both in training and then also in mechanical delivery elements.
Another question. He says, we got a guy from Germany, 18 years old.
I played there.
And
so did you, I think, right?
Yeah, and we don't have such education here, or your videos are helpful. Great. And then the guy asked if there's baseball fields in Germany.
Yes, Regensburg.
Yes, Regensburg.
It's where the national program is.
I played there. I pitched against the Australian national team there. It says
it's called Arnold Wolf Stadium or something like that.
Hey, real quick on that too, he can go on the website and see that educational, and if they type in TopVelocity, they're going to get a discount on that education as well, regardless of where you're at in the world.
Yeah.
So obviously, I don't know what that exchange rate is, because I know even when we get kids from Canada buying, obviously any discount they can do to get on there is going to help them out. So
yeah.
It says, are you saying muscling up kills the layback? Any advice on keeping my arm loose and back too long?
Well, there was, I remember, and this was a teach, maybe Jordan also kind of went through this world, but when I was first playing, and I remember when I converted from pitching to being an infielder, one of the things I was taught was to actually point the ball as far as I can back behind me in this position, in a pronated position. But if you're creating any kind of muscle tension, especially in pronation, as you're trying to lay back, you can't, because you're not putting the bicep on slack, right? So a lot of drills, you see them, some of them are very extreme, where you're going into extreme layback because you're supinating your wrist. You definitely don't want to have additional tension. And remember I told you guys, when the thumb's going this way, that's opening the elbow. The muscles on the pinky side are trying to shut it. That's the varus torque that's trying to keep the elbow together. If I'm really wanting to get a lot of layback, you're looking at putting the bicep on a huge amount of slack and being in a supinated position. We get that when we throw curveballs. You got to be careful though. Again, I've got to go to strength. If you're going to manipulate, something around your grip, or you're going to look at your layback position, put yourself into more supination so that you open up this ligament, my finger even more, you stretch it out, you got to be strong. That's key. Poor Jimmy, I can't
real
tug on him
quick on
anymore.
that too. Earlier today, obviously, before we started jumping on here, there was a bunch of athletes in here training. And that's one of the things I wish guys could come in here and see this. But he was over here throwing, and Brent was working with him, and he's throwing, he throws an 89. And he's like, I'm going to get my 90 right now. And then he muscles up, and he throws like an 85 or something like that. And he goes, every time I try to muscle up, it doesn't work. I get worse. Why do I keep trying to muscle up? Generally, you're going to have some guys on that outlier that, maybe muscling up does work. But in general, no, it's not going to. It usually makes you a little bit worse when you muscle up, because now you're recruiting out of sequence, and you're not allowing that energy to transfer in an actual optimal way.
Yep. That was good. The other one was, he said, it's so hard for me to get my elbow in line with shoulder at landing and feel comfortable. Is there a fix for this?
All right.
I guess.
So this is good, because there's this guy in Albuquerque. He's a really bright guy named Tim Campos. I'm going to name him because I can't remember the name of his company, but he was telling me about his whole theory is that there's a lot of blending going on with throwing drills. Okay. And when I listened to him, I came back because one of the athletes that a friend of mine was working with, and he kind of hired me to help him out, was having tricep tendonitis. Was having underneath here, the tricep was getting really banged up. And I was saying to him, I said, I think we should try to get slow motion video on every single kind of throw this athlete would make. okay? And what was interesting is that he had very good alignment. You know, it was in the scapular plane a long time when he's throwing a baseball, but as soon as he got a plyo ball, this is where his elbow went, okay? And then when I was looking at the plyo ball wall, there's no target. So of course, this athlete is gonna come over in this range, okay? That's gonna be more of a dart, and his elbow is not used to that. There's not such an extension mechanism in throwing, it's more rotation and extension. So he doesn't have the same force vectors. Now, you know, this is the one thing that I would be telling athletes is, you know, get a tripod, buy a tripod on Amazon, set up slow motion video and take a look and be like, and set it up from the side, you know, like I got here, and say, okay, when I throw and I'm in external rotation, this is where my arm's at, and I rotate on this plane. It only goes in front of me a little bit. My forearm, or my upper arm only goes in front of me a little bit while I get into extension. And then when you go into the plyo-care routine, if you're doing this and you got this nasty V, okay, or anything like it, we got problems.
And you also see kids just
be careful, Jimmy.
Yeah, he's losing. Kids throwing baseballs like that. They're going inside 90 hard.
Yeah.
They're not even getting a lot of trunk rotation. So their trunk stops early.
Yeah, and then,
well, they got to release out here. So to get out there, they go from an inside 90 to a push with the elbow, then to that position. So you're right. They're putting a lot of tricep wear and tear into it.
It's just, you know, I see this a lot, and there's nothing against some of the great weighted ball programs out there, but, you know, coaches got to coach. And even players, when they're, you know, maybe not, you know, being reviewed, you know, you gotta measure your arm strength for sure. You know, we have a course on velocity adjustments and monitoring, but you gotta actually look at the mechanisms of how you're throwing. Like, for example, I went to Ryan Chapman, the Chapman Baseball Compound, which is in Irvine, and we spent a day together, and you know, he was giving me, I didn't really throw weighted balls at the time. I was with the Angels, and he gave me a bunch of different weighted balls to throw, and he was slow motion videoing me in all sorts of different positions. He even got on a ladder to get over top of me. And what I thought was interesting is that as soon as I got to a certain point, heavy, you know, my layback went to here, okay? Now I got a light ball, I'm able to lay my shoulder back, so I realized there's just a certain amount of weight that the shoulder may be guarding, okay, that may not be appropriate for athletes.
Which is interesting because it's common in studies where people have had UCL or labrum injuries, and that's the first thing that they lose, right? The first thing they lose is external rotation. So when the arm is injured, or when it feels vulnerable,
or it's tacked down with staples,
it doesn't want to allow layback. So but I think the interesting thing too, what we know when you throw weighted balls, you're gaining layback. So it'd be interesting to see when they threw the weighted balls, did they biomechanically lose external rotation but anatomically gain more?
So, you know, the tough thing is when we look at biomechanics, right? When you look at external rotation of the arm, it's not just the arm, it's also the shoulder blade position, but you can't capture it, right? And there's also some element of thoracic extension.
Because you'll be internally rotating.
Right. Unless you're modeling the spine with a couple different segments, you're not going to know it if it's a one piece. So, you know, a lot of things, like when I get a guy with a slap tear, the first thing we start hammering on is thoracic extension. And this is kind of getting to the training element. You know, the strength and coordination, when we talk about the course, it bothers me in the sense that a lot of the exercise we provide to athletes, we keep cueing them, keep your rib cage down, keep your rib cage down, keep your rib cage down. I hear it all the time. But in the instance of a player like that has had a slap tear and they have no available range, you know, some of them have, you know, they've had, you know, a bicep staple, they've had some pretty gruesome stuff go on with the slap tear, you know, or somebody who's had a glenohumeral ligament injury, they got no chance unless you're able to create that additional range from their trunk. So they need the extensibility. They need to be in an arch position. They need, you know, the sternum to the sky. Like they need it, okay? And like that part, it's, you know, you can tell I'm frustrated. It's irritating to me because we need to also, as strength professionals and clinical professionals, high performance, we have to also appreciate the motor preferences of the athlete and what has been restricted from injury, okay? And we need to be able to promote it. You know, if you can't load your arm going back, okay, you have to figure out what are going to be the primary compensations that you're going to train into to allow you to lay it back to create that range. You know, you see a lot of pictures of guys, this is the thing that's funny, we train like this, you know, trying to like punch in the stomach all the time. And I get it. Testing is important because we got to look at the shoulder joint. We can't let the rib cage go everywhere. You know, but in training, you watch these guys, like you know, here today, testing on the med balls. Like the first cue I had when I watched you, I was like, man, I got to get more of a C in my spine. I got to start stretching this out because it's huge elastic that you need to have.
I mean, that's about it. I want to shut it down. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that was covered pretty good.
All right, cool. Well, guys, appreciate you following. You can ask more questions on the comments. We'll try to get back to you. We're going to have a lot more videos coming out. So follow us on YouTube if you're not already, or get on Instagram, TikTok, anything. I'm going to have a lot more videos that we're going to be doing today to go out to you. We'll see you all next time.